All right, let's set the scene. It's the 1930s, and two countries, Bolivia and Paraguay, are just tearing each other apart over this semi-arid wasteland called the Chaco. Now, in a war this brutal, you'd think the most dangerous enemy would be the guy holding a rifle, right? Well, not always. We're about to dive into a battle where the landscape itself, the very ground they were fighting on, became the weapon. It's a story about one of the most remarkable and, frankly, harrowing events of that entire conflict.
In this quote, it just perfectly captures what we're about to unpack. War in the desert is the glory of tactics and the hell of logistics. Think about that. It's a story where you've got these brilliant, almost genius-level tactics slamming right into the brutal, ugly reality of logistics in one of the harshest places on Earth.
So picture this. You've got an army of 12,000 soldiers, a modern fighting force, right? We're talking a whole cavalry corps with artillery, automatic weapons, and they just disintegrate. They vanish. And not from some huge battle, not from a devastating bombing run. No, it was something way more fundamental, way more basic.
They were defeated by thirst. That's it. The real enemy in this story, the weapon that absolutely destroyed an entire army, was the simple, terrifying lack of water. This is the incredible story of how Paraguay literally weaponized the desert.
Okay, so to really get what's going on here, you first have to understand the Chaco itself. I mean, we're talking a hot, dry, dusty hellscape. So in this kind of war, who cares about capturing cities? That stuff meant almost nothing. The real prize, the one thing that mattered more than anything else, was finding a reliable source of fresh water.
And that brings us to this one specific spot, Yrendague. It was a Bolivian-held fort, but here's the thing. It had the only real, abundant source of fresh water in the entire region. The irony? Paraguayan troops had actually found the wells right before Bolivia took the fort over. So for those 12,000 Bolivian soldiers pushing deeper and deeper into the desert, Yrendague wasn't just some fort on a map. It was their lifeline. It was everything. You lose those wells, you lose the entire army. Simple as that.
So fast forward to late 1934. The Bolivian army, they're feeling pretty good about themselves, a little overconfident, but they're also totally exhausted. Their supply lines are stretched so thin they're about to snap, and this is where the Paraguayans see their chance, an opportunity for this incredibly audacious, high-stakes plan. We're talking about a genuine heist, a plan so risky it was basically suicidal. And to understand why this worked, you just have to look at the two colonels in charge. It's like night and day. For the Bolivians, you've got Colonel David Toro. He's ambitious, he's political, and he's commanding from a comfortable post 160 kilometers away from the fighting. Oh, and get this, he was a key player in a military coup that happened just days before this battle. Talk about distracted. Then for the Paraguayans, you have Colonel Eugenio Garay. He's a 59-year-old veteran, a guy who knew the desert could kill you, and this is key, he marched right at the front with his men. The difference is just staggering.
So what was this impossible heist? Well, it was stunningly simple and just unbelievably daring. Step 1, infiltrate. You're going to secretly move an entire division, thousands of men, right between two massive enemy divisions. Step 2, march. You're going to cover 70 kilometers of pathless desert, totally unseen. Step 3, seize. You pop up behind the enemy and you capture the Yrendague wells. And then, step 4, the genius part. Wait. You just wait. You let the desert do the dirty work for you. Now, pulling this off, this wasn't just a march. This was an absolute gamble. A 70-kilometer race against time, against scorching heat, and against dehydration. The stakes? Oh, just the survival of the entire division. No big deal. Okay, so let's walk through this. December 5th, the 8th Division starts its march in 45 degrees Celsius heat. That's a blistering 113 Fahrenheit. The next day, things are already critical. They're running out of water, so Colonel Garay makes the tough call to halt the advance. On December 7th, they push on, slogging through ankle-deep sand. When they get a lucky break, they manage to capture 2 Bolivian supply trucks. And then, at 3 a.m. on December 8th, they're deep in the enemy's rear, and they completely surprise and capture the Bolivian field hospital. They're just kilometers away from their target.
But you know what saved the entire operation? A moment of doubt. Yeah, that halt Yrendague ordered back on December 6th, the one he made because he was worried about his men, it turned out to be a flat-out miracle. See, they had no idea, but a whole Bolivian division was moving right through that same area at that exact time. If Garay hadn't stopped, they would have run right into them. The element of surprise, gone. The whole mission, doomed. An act of caution saved the whole thing. Unbelievable.
So now they're in position. The main Bolivian force has no clue they're there. Garay's division is perfectly poised to strike right at the heart of the enemy's survival.
The heist is about to hit its climax, and it's all about to go down.
And at dawn on December 8, they did it. The Paraguayans hit the wells at Yrendague. After a very brief firefight, it was over. The wells were theirs. They had cut off the water supply to 12,000 Bolivian soldiers. Just like that, the tap was turned off. For an entire army, deep in the desert under a blazing sun.
What happened next? Honestly, it wasn't a battle. It was a full-blown humanitarian catastrophe. The Bolivian command ordered a retreat, but a retreat to where? There was nowhere to go. Without water, under that relentless sun, the army just dissolved. It stopped being an army and became this desperate, stumbling crowd of thousands of men, each one just trying to survive.
I mean, the accounts from this are just horrific. One pursuing Paraguayan captain said he just couldn't bear the Dantesque scene. Imagine that. He saw so many dying enemy soldiers that he actually ordered his men to stop fighting and give them water, saving their lives. He couldn't just stand by and watch them die like that.
So let's just recap the numbers here. We started with 12,000 men in the Bolivian Cavalry Corps. 12,000.
Of those 12,000, only about 3,000 were eventually taken prisoner, and for many of them, the only reason they survived was because the Paraguayans gave them water.
So what happened to everyone else? Thousands more were dead or just missing, lost to the desert forever. But here's the single most shocking detail of the whole affair. Among all the prisoners taken, not a single one was an officer. They had abandoned their men, using the few available trucks to save themselves.
So how on earth does a disaster of this scale even happen? I mean, this wasn't just one bad call or one mistake. This was a complete systemic failure. A failure of leadership, a failure of strategy, and a failure of culture. When you really look at why this heist worked, it boils down to a few key things. First, distant command. The Bolivian leadership was 160 kilometers away, issuing totally unrealistic orders. Compare that to the Paraguayan Colonel Garay, 59 years old, marching at the head of his troops. That's leadership by example. Then there was logistical failure. Bolivia just disrespected the desert, stretching its supply lines way too far. And you can't ignore the political ambition. The Bolivian commander was distracted by a recent coup. Finally, it was a culture of blame. When things went wrong, the Bolivian officers bailed on their men and pointed fingers. It was a total collapse.
So in the end, you're left with this one big question, right? Who was Bolivia's real enemy here? Was it the Paraguayans, or was it their own leaders? The whole story is just this brutal lesson that you can have all the soldiers and all the gear in the world, but if you don't have good leadership and a solid plan, you can be defeated without even fighting a real battle. It's an incredible piece of history.